On your left is the LG C1 OLED. On your right is Samsung's QN95A Neo QLED with mini LED backlight technology. Both TVs are 65 inches in screen size. Keep watching to find out if OLED or Neo QLED is better for your needs. Even though the 65-inch Samsung QN95A has 792 local dimming zones, and the South Korean brand actually offers some of the best blooming suppression among LED LCD televisions, it still exhibited more blooming than the LG C1 because OLED is simply capable of superior pixel level light control. And if we look at this clip from Gravity where Sandra Bullock is tumbling through space, you can see that the LG C1 OLED delivers inkier blacks with higher contrast. And to be fair, the Samsung Neo QLED isn't doing too bad at all. There is no backlight fluctuation, although there's some vignetting. But when you compare side by side, OLED will always win out in such star-filled scenes. Now on this moving quantization test pattern, you can see that the LG C1 OLED manifested coarser gradation near black, while the Samsung QN95A Neo QLED crushed a bit of black at the beginning, but became brighter with smoother gradation because of LED LCD backlight properties. And if we go to this Game of Thrones clip, the LG OLED will provide more depth to the picture but also suffer from a bit more flashing artifacts, whereas the Samsung Neo QLED will have smoother gradation near black. And if we look at this HDR10 clip from the Revenant, the Samsung Neo QLED is brightened slightly, partly because of its transmissive backlight, but also because of Samsung's dynamic tone mapping that is on at all times. But to be fair, shadow detail and blooming control are acceptable for an LED LCD television, but again, in these dark scenes, OLED will always be superior. Next, we'll move on to check out colors. The LG C1 OLED can be calibrated to a more accurate level, whereas the Samsung Neo QLED is probably more subject to color inaccuracies due to the difficulties in managing backlight control with so many local dimming zones. And another factor is that in HDR10, Samsung's color mapping will introduce some posterization around very bright elements, which forces us to use color space native, which is more inaccurate than auto or color space custom color management system. So you need to bear that in mind when you're watching HDR content on the Samsung Neo QLED. Next, let's move on to motion. With all motion compensated frame interpolation disabled, both televisions correctly apply 5.5 pull down to present 24 frames per second films smoothly without telecinic judder. However, because of OLED's near instantaneous pixel response time, it would exhibit more frame hold stutter inherent in 24p films. So what LG has done for 2021 is to provide a new cinematic movement setting that seeks to reduce the frame hold stutter without introducing significant soap opera effect, and overall I think it worked quite well. But one flaw with LG's True Motion system is that in certain 50Hz broadcasts, it is prone to introducing micro stutter. But this is not to say that the Samsung Neo QLED is flawless either, because with 50Hz broadcast material, engaging picture clarity would introduce some soap opera effect and interpolation artifacts. Moving on to 60 frames per second content, you can use a combination of motion compensated frame interpolation and flat frame insertion on the OLED to achieve a motion resolution of 1080 lines or higher, whereas on the Samsung Neo QLED, just motion interpolation is enough to achieve 1080 lines of motion resolution. And in fact, the LED clear motion flat frame insertion will introduce too much flicker, so we prefer to switch it off. Next, let's talk about video processing. When fed a standard definition signal, the LG C1 OLED allowed overscan to be switched off, but unfortunately this was not possible on the Samsung QN95A Neo QLED. So the picture will always look a bit zoomed in and softer than the LG C1 when watching standard definition content. In terms of film mode deinterlacing, both TVs correctly detected and processed 3:2 cadence. But for PAL countries in terms of interlaced broadcast material, the Samsung QN95A will occasionally lose lock, whereas the LG C1 OLED correctly processed and detected 2:2 cadence at all times. For video-based interlaced material, the Samsung was better because it betrayed less jagged edges on the third bouncing bars and the circle compared to the LG C1 OLED. In terms of chroma bandwidth, the LG passed full chroma bandwidth on this 1080p test pattern from the Spears and Mansell HD benchmark disc, whereas the chroma bandwidth on the Samsung QN95A was horizontally blurred. Next, let's check out uniformity, both bright and dark. When it came to bright uniformity, naturally the OLED has the upper hand because it exhibited no dirty screen effect, bending or color tinting, while the Samsung QN95A Neo QLED still exhibited some mild dirty screen effect or DSE as we cycle through full-field gray slides. The tables were turned in terms of dark uniformity. This video is sponsored by UK electrical retailer Crampton Moore, who have started selling pre-calibrated televisions under my supervision. If you are thinking about getting a new TV, please support this channel by considering buying from them. Call 0113 244 6607, mention HDTV test, and you will receive great price and service. Thanks again for your support. When we put up this 4% above black full-field slide, the LG OLED manifested thin vertical streaks, whereas the Samsung QN95A is obviously brighter because of its transmissive backlight technology, but it is also cleaner looking than the OLED. For HDR, the Samsung QN95A Neo QLED TV is capable of higher peak brightness, and so HDR movies such as Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children will look very impactful, partly because of the lack of ABL and also the higher color volume that the Samsung Neo QLED is capable of. However, you have to bear in mind that there is undefeatable dynamic tone mapping on the Samsung Neo QLED, so its HDR presentation will look brighter than reference. When it came to 4000 nit content such as pan, again, the higher peak brightness, higher color volume, and the lack of ABL on the Samsung QN95A allowed the TV to retain more specular highlight detail and more color saturation at higher brightness compared to the C1 OLED. Native 10-bit gradation was slightly better on the Samsung Neo QLED. However, the LG C1 offers a smooth gradation decontouring filter, which allowed the C1 to overtake the QN95A in gradation. Now, you can use noise reduction on the Samsung, but because it is not a dedicated decontouring filter, it will also scrub away some fine details, so we generally would turn it off. For gaming, with game mode engaged on both televisions, the LG C1 OLED delivered slightly lower input lag than the Samsung QN95A, both at 60 frames per second and also 120 frames per second. Now, even though the game HDR setting on the Samsung QN95A is meant to activate HDRG, for some reason, dynamic tone mapping is still always active, which means that HDRG is not as well implemented as on the LG C1. So I've done another video explaining how to set your HDRG parameters on a Samsung TV to prevent a washed out picture with blown highlights. Because game mode tries to cut down video processing to achieve the lowest input lag for the fastest gaming responsiveness, unfortunately, local dimming on the Samsung QN95A would take a hit, as you can see in this dark scene from Devil May Cry 5 on the PS5. And if you can bear with me for a while I switch to a non-game mode on the Samsung, you can see that the blacks become inkier and come closer to matching what the LG OLED was showing. However, where the Samsung QN95A shines is in bright, colorful games such as Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on the PS5 because of Neo QLED's higher color volume and brightness potential. Also, another advantage of LED LCDs, including the Samsung QN95A Neo QLED TV, is the absolute lack of image retention. Here, I'm displaying a peak wide 10% window in HDR at full blast for 10 seconds before switching to a full field grace light, and you can see that the Samsung Neo QLED doesn't show any afterglow or image retention at all. For use in a bright room with lots of sunlight, I think the Samsung QN95A Neo QLED is clearly the better choice because of its higher brightness reserve, which allows it to pump out a brighter picture to combat ambient lighting in a bright room. And also, it has an anti-reflective filter that can mute reflections in a more effective manner than the glossy coating on the LG C1. However, bear in mind that depending on how the light hits the screen, there may be some rainbow reflections seen on the Samsung QN95A. In terms of sound quality, I muted the TVs in turns while trying to match the volume, and to my ears, the LG C1's voice sounded a bit more forward, but with a muddier bass as well. The bass of the QN95A was tighter with better definition, but overall, both televisions deliver above average audio quality for in-TV speakers. Let's sum up. Despite the mini LED backlight technology implemented on the Samsung Neo QLED TV, which allows for more local dimming zones, the LG C1 OLED still delivered superior image quality overall, thanks to pixel-level light control without blooming artifacts, more accurate colors and PQ-EOTF tracking, Dolby Vision support, cleaner motion without ghosting or VA black smearing, as well as minimal picture degradation in game mode. However, this doesn't mean that OLED is suitable for everyone, because the Samsung QN95A still has a few advantages over the LG C1. Neo QLED is more suitable to be installed in a bright, sunlit room. Neo QLED can render bright HDR scenes with more impact and saturation without suffering from wRGB OLED's wide subpixel dilution. And finally, Neo QLED is entirely immune to image retention, even though the risk of permanent screen burn on the latest OLED TVs is extremely low these days. At the end of the day, whether you go for OLED or Neo QLED will depend on your budget and use case. And hopefully you found this side-by-side comparison video helpful towards your purchase decision. If you would like to watch more of our TV comparison videos, please click here for our playlist, and I will see you in the next video.